You are listening to the Hamingja Podcast, the renaissance of Western spirituality, paganism and animism. We show the Dharmic path and common origin of Norse, Germanic, Vedic, Greco-Roman, Celtic, Balto-Slavic and Persian beliefs. We also draw parallels to the Proto-Indo-European worldview and the ancient beliefs we call the religion with no name. The Hamingja Podcast weaves the threads together to understand where we come from and let our true nature empower us in everyday life. We don't have to turn to the east. The answers were always right here. We are all pagan by instinct. This podcast is about Western spirituality and the Dharmic path. It's time to find our true identity again. And to know thyself, it's best to start from the beginning. Over this and the next episode, I'll explain the main elements that constitute the foundation of where we are spiritually today. Here I'll give a brief historical overview of how the Proto-Indo-European people came to change Europe and big parts of the northern hemisphere. I'll also discuss two main themes and principles that are key to understand the later pagan branches and our own worldview. So who are we? How can we get a deeper understanding for our pagan and animist worldview? For this, we need to go to the origin. We need to talk about Europe 23,000 years ago. The spirituality of the Indo European peoples that spread over the Eurasian continent and became the pagan branches we'll cover in this podcast is a mixture of the animism that all the peoples of the Meso and Neolithic age shared, and the polytheism and local religions that Christians of Rome named pagan. Just like our genetics are a mix, so is our spirituality. We are one part hunter-gatherer, one part so-called early European farmer, and one part Indo-European. For tens of thousands of years, Europe was inhabited by Western hunter-gatherers, who later merged with the first farmers who came from Anatolia. These are the same peoples that much later would build the Stonehenge. These groups were all animists, with a belief that all things are animated and have self-consciousness. 23,000 years ago, the inhabitants of Europe discovered the importance of collecting and consuming wheat, something that would change the destiny of mankind. 14,500 years ago, they became the first farmers in human history by not only collecting wheat, but also cultivating it and becoming domiciled. They also domesticated cattle like the aurochs that we see depicted in pictograms all over Europe, and later also symbolized in the rune Urus. I'll cover this much more in the next episode. Their beliefs were now a mix between the Paleolithic hunter rituals and the new focus on the fertility needed to grow crops. They also worshipped the mother goddess of fertility, who dies in the winter and is reborn in the spring to give life to the crops, a symbolism that becomes key in all the Indo-European branches later on. They started building Europe's first organized civilizations, but little did they know that they were soon to get visitors. As mentioned before, we are a mix of these early European farmers and the Proto-Indo-European people that came in from the east. In fact, the further south we go in Europe, the more DNA people have from the early Neolithic farmers, while Northern Europeans have more of the Proto-Indo-Europeans that migrated in from the east. The Etruscans, the Minoans, and the culture that built Stonehenge are examples of pre-Proto-Indo-European societies, but indeed did the agricultural areas get visitors. From the Eurasian steppes came a semi-nomadic people we call the Proto-Indo-Europeans. About 8,000 years ago, they migrated in huge numbers both towards Western Europe and Asia. This prehistoric people of Eurasia has its origin on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, basically the area from the northern Black Sea to the northern parts of the Caspian Sea, approximately today's Bulgaria and Romania, and all the way to the western parts of Kazakhstan. Whether they regarded themselves as a linguistic or ethnic community is not known, nor by which name they referred to themselves. They may have called themselves the Teutones, from Teuta, people, in their own language. It's very common among older cultures to simply call oneself the people. In fact, the German word Deutsch, in Old High German Diutisk, means popular, vernacular, and in Proto-Germanic Diudiskas means of the people or popular, itself an adjective from Proto-Germanic Deudo, people, and we can also compare that to Old English Theod and Proto-Indo-European Teute. All the knowledge we have about the Proto-Indo-Europeans comes from material evidence from archaeology and archaeogenetics, together with archaeolinguistics and reconstruction. Indo-Europeans have always been referred to as a linguistic group, a group of languages that mainly originated in and spread from Europe. And language is a carrier of culture, so it can be said that there is one original Indo-European culture. You can tell a lot about a people by looking at their language. They didn't have any written language, but just as we can reconstruct their language by comparing their descendant languages, we can reconstruct their culture by comparing their descendant cultures. So who were they? The language suggests a people living on a grassy, open homeland with big skies. A flat grassland perfect for transportation, making them semi-nomadic and mobile herders of sheep and cattle rather than sedentary agriculturalists. It's easy to understand that if they had a word for something, they must have had the thing. For example, we know that they had houses with doors, dwer. We also know they had a word for prisoner, meaning that they didn't immediately kill enemies. But it's a nomads and shepherds language, full of words for wool, transportation, wheels, riding, wagons, etc. They were pastoralic, meaning a transhuman culture whose economy is centered around raising livestock, which is brought to summer pastures when the weather gets warm. There it is watched over by the young men, while the older men, women and children, stay at home and take care of the crops that's been planted before the cattle had been taken away. In the autumn the cattle is brought back and the whole tribe is together for the winter. With a mobile lifestyle, it's easy to assume that the primary place of worship was the hearth of the home, and that places in nature as well as temporary altars were used as sanctuaries. We also know that they were fiercely warlike. The new pastures they would have to find every so often were usually occupied by others, and the newcomers would have to conquer, kill or drive off the land's earlier inhabitants in order to use their fields. This is also why the vocabulary is so full of words circling around war and battle. It must also be the source of the phenomenon Koryos, the brotherhood of warriors we see in all later Indo-European branches. Unmarried young males did military service for a number of years before their full integration in society, as a rite of passage. In the Vedic tradition, this part of life started already at the age of 8, when boys started reading heroic literature and learned hunting and fighting. This stage of life has to do with the Ulfhednar and Berserkers, to take on the attributes of animals, to go beyond the human taboos and laws. It was the life stage before becoming the householder, and ended with a man getting married. We're going to come back to this in future episodes. Now, the vocabulary points at a tribe-based, hierarchical, patriarchal, and warlike culture. The English words king and kin are related in the Indo-European languages, which shows that your king was also your kin. In fact, the Proto-Indo-European word herios, meaning kinsman, was the one that later became the Indo-Iranian word Aryan, nobleman or lord. Their society was trifunctional, with a priest class, a warrior class, and a peasant or husbandman class. This tripartite structure is also immensely reflected in spirituality, and that we'll also have to come back to. This was a culture with two particular military advantages over their neighbors: the domesticated horse and the wheel. A culture of warriors mounted on horseback who accumulated wealth from stock breeding, rustling, and warfare. They cared deeply about glory obtained in war, and sang praise poems at their elaborate funerals. The more mature Indo-European cultures, like the Germanics, Norse, Celts, Greek, etc., of course didn't just pop up from the ground one day from isolation. Archaeology shows that our cultural expressions, not the least burial mounds and rituals, were performed already thousands of years earlier on the Pontic-Caspian steppe. This is the tradition and heritage we build upon today, or at least should. About 4,000 years ago, offshoots of the Proto-Indo-Europeans had reached far and wide across Eurasia, including Anatolia, the Aegean, the north of Europe, the edges of Central Asia, and southern Siberia. From the Celts in the west to the Vedic culture in today's India. If you'd ask a modern-day Hindu, they'd say that at one point everything from Ireland's Atlantic coast to Japan was the Vedic world, or the Dharmic world. But once again, the Proto-Indo-Europeans didn't enter a wasteland. None of the areas that the Proto-Indo-Europeans conquered were just empty space. They didn't just, so to say, move to a new lawn and park the chariot there. There were Neolithic peoples already living there, not the least the Scandinavian funnel beaker culture. And they influenced each other, linguistically, culturally, spiritually. A recent study shows that there are words in Danish, English, and German, mainly within flora and fauna, that don't follow the established sound changes of Indo-European vocabulary. Words like sturgeon, shrimp, pea, bean, and turnip were there already before the invasion and entered the Indo-European languages from the other direction, so to say. The deeply animistic beliefs of the Neolithic peoples also influenced the Proto-Indo-Europeans. The early European farmers brought organized civilizations. The Proto-Indo-Europeans brought a more martial, patriarchal culture focused on strength, action, exchange, and an eternal gifting cycle. Each of them brought different elements of culture, worldview, and spirituality to the table, and we carry both inside us. And the combination of those two poles, animism and what we call paganism, that merged and emerged in the countries that today speak Indo-European languages, is the perception, spirituality, and way of life that this podcast is all about. We know that the Neolithic farmers already living in Europe at the arrival of the Proto-Indo-Europeans were deeply animistic, and that their beliefs and worldview influenced and shaped the Proto-Indo-Europeans. It is the mix of these two cultures that became the Indo European pagan branches. The animistic foundation will be subject for another episode, the next one, and here we'll focus on what the Proto-Indo-Europeans brought to the table. In the beginning was the Word. I'm just kidding, that's another story. In the beginning there was absolutely nothing. Neither non-being was, nor being was at that time. There was not the air, nor the heaven beyond it, to quote the Veda texts. There was not sand, nor sea, nor the cool waves. Earth was nowhere, nor heaven above. Ginnungagap there was, but grass nowhere, says Völusbo. There was chasm and night and dark Erebos at first, and broad Tartarus, but earth nor air nor heaven there was. That's if we listen to Aristophanes. So in the beginning there was nothing. But you see, if you want to understand nothing, you have to put a hyphen between no and thing. It's not a thing. It's not material. It's not visible. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, that there's nothing there. It just can't be seen with your regular eyes. Today the scientists talk about dark matter. 99% or more of the whole universe is dark matter. We are used to that matter is something manifest, something that breaks the light and therefore is visible and perceivable. Dark matter doesn't absorb, reflect, or emit light, but that still doesn't mean it's not there. Almost nobody pays attention to darkness. You're not able to grasp it. The most important for you, where you sit and listen to this right now, is probably the air you're breathing. You don't see it, you don't notice it, but without it, it will go pear-shaped quite quickly. Us modern people focus on what we can see and grasp, and while doing that, we miss what's vital. About 99.9% of the universe is dark matter. Still, if you looked up at the sky, you'd probably see the stars. The rest would be nothing to you, void, Ginnungagap. But that doesn't mean nothing's there. It's rather a no thing. It is Shiva, meaning nothing. No thing. It's a dimension. Our ancestors understood this, that in the beginning, even though there was nothing, it was all there already from the beginning. All the divine, all the order, all vital, all Brahman, all Atman. Empedocles, the Greek master teaching yoga 2,500 years ago, yes, you heard that right, says about our ancestors, they realized that the divine isn't something you can see with your eyes or hold in your hands. It doesn't have a face or feet or gender, but is pure consciousness which extends throughout the entire cosmos. Divine being is without beginning or end. It is nothing but consciousness in any direction, and eternally rejoices in the encircling silence. It is our task to reclaim this divine awareness, lost when we forgot our undying inner self, and identified completely with our body, he finishes. And this no thing, this dimension of eternal natural order and divinity, is the first of the two most important principles of Indo European spirituality. It is the world tree around which the whole cosmos is centered. Its branches that are everywhere form the ordered arrangement of things, actions and fate. It is Yggdrasil, it is the Axis Mundi, the Irminsul. And its branches form the Chartus, in fact the very root that gave the much later Vedic word Rita. Chartus is the divine order and the natural essence of everything. It governs the orderliness of the universe, the motion of the stars, the regularity of the seasons and the years, and further the relations of gods and men, and finally the relations of men to one another. It is the Dharma, or what Western Europeans would call the web of weird. It is what binds us all together. This is something I'm going to elaborate a lot on in upcoming episodes, believe you me. Let's get back to the creation, shall we? Upon the branches of this Chartus, the Proto-Indo-Europeans meant that the material world and the natural elements are created and manifested out of the primordial cow or bull. In Norse that would be Audhumla. The first individual expression takes shape, the first Atman. The divine twins Manu, yes, the rune Manas comes from this name, and Yemo then creates the physical world with that Manu sacrifices his own brother to the Sky Father. This has a counterpart, for example, in the myth of Remus and Romulus of Rome. Manu thus becomes the first priest after initiating sacrifice as the primordial condition for the world order. His deceased brother Yemo, this we can compare with the Hindu death god Yama, turns into the first king as social classes emerge from his anatomy. Priesthood from his head, the warrior class from his breast and arms, and the commoners from his sexual organs and legs. With the risk of digging too deep already, I can add that originally Yama or Yemo might have been a hermaphrodite. The two Germanic names Ymir and Twisto means twin, bisexual and hermaphrodite. The primordial being may therefore have self-sacrificed, and we would understand Odin's sacrificed himself to himself even better. The other world and reincarnation is of course also something we'll dive deeper into here on the channel. As an offering back, the Sky Father then gives cattle and the knowledge of livestock farming to the hero Trito. Trito's name means the third. He's equivalent to the Vedic Trita, the Avestan Thretona, the Norse Thridi, which is also one of Odin's names. But the cattle get stolen by a three-headed serpent. To get it back, Trito has to hunt down and slay the serpent. He's first about to lose the battle, but fortified by an intoxicating drink offered to him by the storm god, he finally manages to overcome the serpent. This slaying of the serpent or dragon myth exists in all the Indo European branches. It makes Trito the first warrior and serves as a model for the later cattle raiding I mentioned in the last episode, a moral justification for the practice of raiding among Indo European peoples. He also forms the Kshatriya warrior class and the emergence of the trifunctional Indo-European societies. It's also the origin of the Roman comitatus, the Greek choreos, and the Norse berserker warrior bands. But more on that in the future. What I've just mentioned are the two single most important essences of Indo-European spirituality. The divine natural order permeating everything called Chartus, and the Gosti principle, the reciprocal gifting cycle, the marriage between heaven and earth, between human and divine. If there are two things you want to bring with you and become truly pagan, it is the world tree of natural law and the importance of giving and hospitality. This is the foundation of everything. To reach the divine, you need to give yourself to yourself, and we're all bound together by the tree of weird. In fact, the word yoga itself literally means union, or a yoke. That's to say, when you transcend your physical form and nature, and the divine in you unites with the general divine through the sacrifice of the body. You, so to say, use a yoke to bind yourself to the divine, bind your soul to the divine. The insight that you too are a no thing and part of the divine. Odin, quote, sacrificed himself to himself. He sacrificed the false ego and the body to gain this insight. Ritual and magic is all about building relations, basically to put the forces around you in a good mood. So the very first things that happen in the creation are offerings. Manu's sacrifice is the first, and Skyfather rewards it with a gift back. Trito is making a sacrifice through the effort he's making of chasing down and slaying the serpent. And the reciprocity goes round and round. I can't stress the importance of this enough. The core beliefs in Proto-Indo-European religion was sacrifice and the reciprocal nature of hospitality. There is an interaction among people and between people and the gods in accord with the laws of hospitality. Society is bound together by an exchange of gifts, by acting as a guest on one occasion and a host on another. In the same way, we are bound to the gods through the giving of gifts and the receiving of blessings. This is what they call Prasada in Hinduism. It is a sacrificial ideology, and to strive to unite with the divine is all about offering. Ritualistically, physically, affectionately, emotionally, spiritually, lovingly. If you don't give of yourself, you can never be part of the divine. Still today, the Hindu word for selfless service and religious charity is seva. That literally means to be like him. When we give of ourselves, we act like the divine. If the dharma of fire is to be blazing hot, the dharma of the soul is to give. That's what the gurus say still today. This reciprocity and gifting cycle is what we call the Gosti principle, the second of the two most important spiritual phenomena in the Proto-Indo-European worldview. This is at the root of our relationship with other people and with the gods, and at the nature of the cosmos. It's impossible to understand Proto-Indo-European religion and also paganism without understanding reciprocity and the Gosti principle. It's all about creating a harmonic and balanced relationship to the beings and forces around us in life. The Proto-Indo-European word Gosti, spelled Ghosti, actually means guest and host in the same word, the virtue of hospitality. And that's exactly what happens here. Relations are created through the exchange of gifts, of receiving and being obliged to reciprocate those gifts. When a sacrifice is performed, we are, so to say, the hosts, and the gods are our guests. Since the gods know the rules of hospitality, they are then obligated to serve as hosts on another occasion. and they do so by granting us favors. Same thing with the Chartus. The Proto-Indo-Europeans saw the cosmos as centered around a tree and surrounded by water. The water rises up through a well to feed the tree. The tree is the cosmos itself, an ordered arrangement of things and actions, and the water is chaos, disorder. Order is fed by disorder. Left alone, order, like an unwatered tree, dries out and dies. An influx of chaos is vital to life. Chaos is dangerous and can't support life on its own, but it becomes meaningful when it is drawn into order. It is through this interaction the universe can continue to exist. We form our lives within the organizing Chartus, and then our lives, like all things that happen in the cosmos, are fed into the Chartus. The things we do, as they pass away, and eventually we ourselves, also fall into the waters of chaos. Eventually, however, like the water from the well, all that we have given to chaos returns to cosmos, transformed first in the waters and then by the tree. Like the tree, we have been fed by chaos, and we then feed chaos in turn. In both the Gosti principle and the functioning of the Chartus, we see the working of the central ideology of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, that of reciprocity. This was just a first look, scratching the surface. There are obviously many other concepts and beliefs that are crucial to understand ourselves, like that of the trifunctional society, the immortal soul, reincarnation, afterlife, the personal law we call Swartus or Dharma, all the gods, and also the importance of magic. There's of course also the so-called mysteries, the traditions, holidays, festivals and astrology, etc. But they will be addressed individually in future episodes. But today's key takeaways: number 1, Chartus, that the Norse and Anglo-Saxons would call örlog, or weird. The Hindus would call it Rita, and the Persians would call it Asha. And number 2, the Gosti principle, that if you want to live in harmony and balance with the Chartus and fulfill your Swartus, then you need to understand that giving is receiving and vice versa, that it's all built up on sacrifice, that you need to be the host and the guest at the same time. I want to thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you increase your Hamingja straight away. You'll find more information about the podcast and the foundation on hamingja.foundation. You'll also find us on Instagram, Discord and YouTube, and more platforms will follow. Feel free to contact us if you have questions, requests or need guidance. I hope to hear from you soon and that you'll tune in next time. And until then, seek not the religion of your ancestors. Seek what your ancestors sought.